Hi everybody, my name is Justin. Today I want to talk about one of the biggest mistakes I see when it comes to how people structure their training programs while playing Ultimate Frisbee. Now there's a lot of different things that we can do in Ultimate. We can practice, we can play games or pickup, we can go to a tournament, and a lot of people are also doing their own training programs on the side. And this is a lot of training. This is a lot of physical stress on the body. Some people might look at this and say, oh, you're overtraining. When in reality, the bigger fear should be under recovery. Overtraining really doesn't exist. There's no arbitrary amount of training that's too much to the point where you've overtrained. It's under recovery. In theory, I should be able to train however much I want as long as I can recover from it. Whatever practice, program, and game schedule you have, it will work as long as you have the recovery, as long as your sleep is good, nutrition's good, and you're resting enough. Now, how most people do it is they don't have enough recovery. So then they end up doing a little bit too much and they get hurt or they're too fatigued. So one of the best ways that we can structure our training programs to make sure that we have proper recovery is a high-low training sequence. In order to explain this, I want to use the Phoenix Suns as an example. If you've seen some of their videos on the internet, you might have seen the ones where they are training in the tunnel of the arena. So literally right after the game, they've got weights out and they're getting a post-game lift in. And at first glance, that might not make a lot of sense. You might look at that and think, why would they do a workout after they literally just played a game, right? They're probably gassed, they're very fatigued. It doesn't make sense to do even more work. But let me tell you why this is actually genius. This is a sample schedule I just made up. Let's pretend the Suns have a game on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. We can agree that a game is a very high intensity day. You're out there for 1 to 2 hours going at 100% effort. So we're going to call these our high intensity days. Now some people might look at this and say, okay, if I want to get a high intensity workout session in, let's say I want to go to the gym and get a very good lift in, when should I put this in? Well, I've got these open days in between, let me add them in there. So now if I'm an athlete and I'm in the gym, I'm going to get a very high intensity lift in, so that's a high intensity day. Then I've got a game, that's another high intensity day. Another lift, that's high intensity. Game, high intensity. Lift, high intensity. And then lastly, game, high intensity. That's 6 high intensity days in the row. What ends up happening with this is our intensity slowly starts to taper off. Day 1, I can truly give 100%, but then day 2, because of the fatigue, I'm now maybe at 95, 90%, then about 85, 90%, and I'm slowly decreasing here. And on the very last day, I'm trying to give 100%, but now my 100% is only maybe 70 to 80%. And this is what we want to avoid. The last thing we want is our high intensity days ending up becoming these ugly medium intensity training sessions. What makes more sense is exactly what the pros are doing. After a game, your adrenaline's pretty high, you're in that fight or flight, and it's going to be really hard to get yourself back down into a relaxed state where you can start to recover. So why not just tack a lift on at the end of it? It's already going to be a high intensity lift, so you might as well just pack everything into one day so it's very, very high intensity. That now opens up these other days as low intensity days. So now I can make sure I pretty much have a day in between every single one of my high intensity ones so I can recover and make those gains, and then I can make sure that the high intensity actually stays high. Now these low intensity days, they're not just rest days. I can still be productive and get a lot of stuff done. Some of the things they might be doing are practice. And this isn't a very intense practice. This might just be walkthroughs of play, some drills, just getting some shots up, right? Just getting the heart rate up and the blood flowing so then you can feel good, but it's not something that's going to absolutely crush you. A lot of these guys are probably also dealing with injuries, and if you've ever been to a physical therapist, they've probably given you some rehab exercises. And again, this isn't something that's intense. It's mobility, it's isolated strengthening, things that we can add in so that we're still getting a workout, but it's not going to tax us. Lastly, they might just be doing a lot of recovery. These guys have a lot of money, so they can afford massages, or they can do some of the newer technology like compression therapy or cryotherapy, things like that, where they can just facilitate the recovery process to make sure that they're feeling good by game day. Let's relate this now to Ultimate Frisbee. Let's pretend I play on a college team. We've got practices on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then we've got a game coming up this Saturday. But we know in Ultimate, practice is always high intensity. We're not like the NBA where we can just walk through and do a low intensity practice. All practices ends up progressing to scrimmaging and just playing pickup, right? You're going to be tired by the end of it. It's probably a 2 to 3 hour event. So those are high intensity days. How often do you actually just play one game of Ultimate, right? You usually got 3 or 4. That's another high intensity day. So if I'm looking at this and I ask myself, where do I want to put in my lifts? Well, I might think like before, Monday, Wednesday, Friday is great. Well, I don't have practice, so now my evenings are opened up. Let me add them in here. But that's going to lead me down the same path. I'm going to have a high intensity lift, high intensity lift, high intensity. You get the idea. That's going to be a lot of high intensity. Got to add in my lifts on these practice days. So now all my high intensity stuff is all in one day, and that opens up these other days for my low intensity days. And just like before, low intensity doesn't mean it's a rest day. I can still be very productive during these days. For Ultimate Frisbee, for example, one of the things that we can do during a low intensity day is our upper body training. A lot of people want to look good. They want to look jacked. And upper body training is going to be a little bit less intense than lower body training. Think about a squat or a deadlift. You're using pretty much every single muscle in your body. It's a lot of stress on the body. But if I'm just doing bicep curls, that's a smaller muscle group. I can recover from that very, very quickly. So I can add that in on my low intensity day. If you follow me on Instagram, I talk a lot about mobility in the throw. There's a lot of moving parts during the throw, and there's a lot of mobility drills that you can do to help improve yours. So that's something that you can do during those low intensity days, is those mobility or accessory drills. You can also do a little bit of what's called zone 2 cardio. Zone 2 is a very specific heart rate range, and this has been found to help facilitate recovery. It's actually restorative. It's not like high intensity interval training or just very intense cardio where I'm going for a run, but I'm going as hard as possible the entire time. That's intense. You're going to need some time to recover from that. But zone 2 actually helps with that recovery. So that's some low intensity conditioning that I can do. Another thing I can do is practicing this skill of throwing, right? Everybody can always improve their throwing. So I can get out there and throw. I want to be careful that this throwing session doesn't progress into me playing mini or me playing pickup, because then that's going to be high intensity as well. But I can get out there, I can just work on very specific skills. I can jog in between my reps maybe, just get the heart rate going a little bit. Now, if you're lucky, then you can get the heart rate into zone 2. So now I'm getting that restorative conditioning while also practicing a skill. So that's 2 birds with 1 stone. We can see that by alternating this, I can still get a ton of work in. I can be very efficient, but I can make sure that that work is effective. I'm actually making sure that my high intensity stays high, and then my low intensity allows me to recover and make those gains. Lastly, let's dive a little bit deeper into what this actually looks like. How can I pair my lifting and practice in the same day? Now, I could lift in the morning and then have practice in the evening. That's just your standard 2 a day. I could also lift about an hour before practice. So I'm in the gym an hour before, I get that training session in, and then by the time I show up to practice, I'm warmed up, I feel good, and then I get all of my high intensity training in that 3 to 4 hour window. That's all great, but not all of us can implement an MBA style training program into our everyday lives, right? We don't get paid millions of dollars to train full time. We've got full-time jobs, we've got school, family, lives. For a lot of us, just getting to practice is a win. So how can we still make this happen in a realistic manner? The question we've got to ask ourselves then is, what is redundant in our training? What aspects are overlapping? What am I not getting from playing Ultimate that I need to supplement in my lifting? That's exactly what training should be while you're in season. If you're in the off season, maybe you're not playing as much Ultimate, so you need to be doing a little bit extra. But in season, lifting should really just be supplemental, right? We don't want it to be the main thing. We're going to get a lot of training qualities out of just playing the sports, and lifting is just getting us those things that we're not getting. So for example, conditioning is one of the big ones. When we are playing Ultimate, that is high intensity cardio. Not that low intensity zone 2 cardio I talked about, but our high intensity interval training, right, our high intensity cardio, we don't need to be doing that during our training sessions. Playing the sport is going to be plenty. So another thing is our plyometrics. Think about how often you actually do a max effort vertical jump, or you do like a max effort sprint while you're playing Ultimate. Throughout the course of a tournament, it might only be a handful of times. Most of what Ultimate is low to medium intensity plyometrics, very kind of low intensity jumps, cuts, things like that. That's called extensive plyometrics. Now, with that said, those max effort vertical jumps in game are super important when they do occur. If you actually want to sky somebody and score in the end zone, then you better make sure that your vertical is there. So we've still got to supplement some of that high intensity stuff. So that's called intensive plyometrics. Low volume, very high intensity jumps or bounds or things like that. Then lastly is our strength work. There's no resistance training while you're playing the sport of ultimate, but we've got to make sure that we're maintaining or we're building strength and power, and we've got to do that during our training sessions. And I'll make a completely separate video about how you should structure your strength work, whether you should be doing lower weight, should you be doing higher weight. It all depends on what time of the year you're in, but generally you're always going to need to be doing some sort of strength work. These are just a couple examples of ways that you can make this training session a little bit shorter. And making sure that you're getting rid of the overlap, then you're not in the gym for a very long period of time. The Phoenix Suns, when they're doing that post-game lift, they're only there for about 30 to 45 minutes. So if we can get in the gym and get our high intensity training, but in a very efficient manner, then we can look at this and say, okay, that's a little bit more realistic.
So I need to interrupt real quick because I realized while editing this video, I definitely need to clarify that I'm not saying you never need to do high intensity conditioning. I'm not saying that you never need to do extensive plyometrics. I'm just saying that if you're going to do a high-low training split and you're going to have difficulty getting in a workout on your practice day or on your game day, right? If those high intensity days, if that's going to be a lot for your schedule, then it's probably good to cut down on some of the redundant stuff. And the redundant stuff is the high intensity conditioning, the extensive plyometrics. So it's not that you never need to do it. It's just if you're trying to implement this and you need help with efficiency, that's something to consider.
Sum it all up, this high-low training split is all about recovery. Training's not going to mean anything unless you can actually recover from it, because that's where the adaptations are made. The gains are made while you're actually resting. High-low makes sure that your high intensity actually stays high by allowing you to have these periods of low intensity. We never want our high intensity to end up becoming this disgusting medium intensity. Never want to taper off, keep our high intensity high and our low intensity low. If you found this video helpful, please go down there and give me a like. If you like more content, please subscribe. If you have any questions about this, feel free to put them in the comments. This is a little bit of an interesting topic, so I'm happy to answer any questions.